My name is Renata Sinclair. Everyone calls me Ray. I'm 34 years old. And until one Thursday evening in October, I believed changing my locks meant my parents no longer had a way into my life. I was wrong. I pulled into my driveway just after 6 and saw my parents' gray SUV parked at the curb. They didn't wave. They didn't get out. They waited until I noticed the box on my porch, then drove away without a word. A small white card was tucked under the ribbon. 4 words, my mother's handwriting, "Don't make a scene." I should have left it there. Instead, I carried it inside and cut the ribbon myself. The first thing I found was a photograph of me at my own design studio, taken from across the street, through the front window, mid-conversation with a client who had no idea he was in the frame. The second was a spare key to my house, one I hadn't given anyone in 3 years. Underneath both sat a thick envelope stamped with the letterhead of a law office I didn't recognize. My hands were shaking by the time I called 911. 2 officers arrived within 11 minutes. They separated the contents on my kitchen table and told me not to touch anything else. That's when my husband, Derek, came through the front door, stopped cold at the sight of the uniforms, and went pale looking at the open box. "Please tell me they didn't actually do it," he said. Those words scared me more than the photograph had, because they meant he already knew something I didn't. Before I tell you what the officers found underneath that envelope, and why my husband looked like he'd seen a ghost, tell me in the comments, what's the last thing your family ever left on your doorstep without asking? Both officers turned to Derek. So did I. He pointed at the envelope and asked if anyone had touched the documents yet. They hadn't. He exhaled and said, 3 weeks ago, her father asked me to sign something. He called it a temporary limited power of attorney, in case Ray was ever, in his words, not in a position to make sound decisions about the studio. I told him no. I stared at him. He had never mentioned this. Derek explained that my father, Victor, had approached him outside his office, calm and almost pleasant, the way he always was right before something ugly. When Derek asked why such a document was necessary, Victor said my mother, Carol, believed I'd been showing signs of instability and that someone dependable needed to be ready to step in. Derek told him to stay away from us. Victor had smiled and said, "That may not be your decision to make." Derek had stayed quiet because he thought telling me would drag up things I'd spent years trying to bury. The senior officer introduced himself as Officer Alvarez. He pulled on gloves and lifted the rest of the envelope's contents onto the table. A small digital voice recorder, a USB drive, a folder of photographs spanning nearly 2 months. And at the very bottom, a document titled Petition for Temporary Conservatorship. My name was on it, prepared, nearly ready to file. One of the photographs had been taken through the fence behind my studio's parking lot. In the reflection of a car window, part of the photographer's face was visible. It wasn't my mother. It wasn't my father. It was a man I'd never seen in my life. Officer Alvarez stopped treating this like an ordinary family dispute. He called for a supervisor and an evidence technician, then asked if my parents had ever had a key to my house. I told him my father had helped us install a new back door lock 2 years earlier. We'd changed the front lock after cutting contact 8 months ago. Not the back one. Derek closed his eyes. Neither of us needed to say what that meant. The petition, mostly unsigned, was built around prepared statements. According to them, I'd missed 3 business filings, mismanaged client funds, exhibited erratic behavior toward staff, and shown signs of a rapid cognitive decline, requiring immediate oversight. None of it was true. One statement carried what looked like Derek's signature. He leaned over it and said flatly, "That's not mine." Another page was a letter from a psychiatrist I had never once met, describing evaluation sessions that never happened, recommending I be removed from control of my own finances before an avoidable collapse. It read like something designed to sound reasonable to a judge who'd never met me. Alvarez asked about the recorder. Derek recognized the model instantly. He'd found one just like it, under the passenger seat of his car, 2 months earlier, and assumed it belonged to a coworker. When he later asked, The co-worker said it wasn't his. Derek had thrown it away. This one had a strip of adhesive on the back and a label that read, Studio 2. Studio 2 suggests there was a Studio 1, Alvarez said quietly. The officers asked to do a sweep of the house for surveillance devices. We agreed. They found a small camera fitted into a smoke detector facing my home office desk, and a second device tucked behind an air vent near the hallway closet where I kept client contracts. Neither was connected to our Wi-Fi. They stored footage locally, meaning whoever planted them intended to come back and collect the memory cards themselves. They also found faint scratch marks around the back door lock. I remembered my mother showing up unannounced at my studio's open house 3 weeks earlier, hugging me before I could step back, telling everyone how proud she was. At the time, I thought she wanted an audience. Now I wondered if my father had been somewhere else entirely while she kept me occupied. The technician bagged everything. Alvarez warned us that forged documents alone didn't prove who wrote them, and that draft petitions could exist without ever being filed. But hidden cameras, a duplicate key, and a stalking pattern were a different matter entirely. He told us not to confront my parents, not to post anything, and asked if we had somewhere else to stay that night. We packed 1 bag each and left for Derek's sister's place across town. Before we left, Alvarez asked one more question. Did your parents know your husband would be home late tonight? I said yes. My mother had called Derek's office that morning to confirm dinner plans. Neither of us remembered making. Alvarez looked at the placement of the box, then back at the door. They may have expected you to open this alone, he said. I finally understood what "don't make a scene" had actually meant. It wasn't a warning to stay calm. It was an instruction to stay isolated. I need you to understand where this came from. Or you might think I overreacted. I didn't. I had 30 years of practice. My father built a modest logistics company from nothing after his own father. Lost the family hardware business to what Victor always called other people's carelessness. He'd so never forgave that loss, and he built his entire worldview around one belief: control prevents collapse. Every decision in our house ran through that filter. When I got into art school at 19, he told me creative careers were how families lose everything, twice. My mother cried until I picked the business program he preferred instead. For years I called that my own decision, because admitting the truth felt worse than the decision itself. When I finally opened my design studio 4 years ago, fully funded by my own savings, my father called it a hobby with overhead. Mother sent flowers to the opening with a card that read, "We hope this teaches you something." That night at Derek's sister's house, I didn't sleep. Every creak in the hallway sounded like a key turning somewhere. In the morning, Detective Priya Nandan called us back to the station. The USB drive hadn't come from any device in our current home. It held 6 years of scanned documents, recordings and photographs. The earliest recording was a phone call between my mother and me from the week I signed my studio's lease. I remembered the conversation. I never knew it had been recorded. On the audio, she sounds warm, encouraging even. After I hang up, my father's voice comes through. Clearly unaware anyone else was listening. She'll come back to us once the studio fails. It always does for people like her. Hearing that sentence years later felt like finding a trapdoor under a floor I'd walked across my whole life. The drive also held years of my tax filings, client contracts, Derek's work schedule, and notes twisting ordinary events into evidence. A canceled meeting became abandoning clients. A late invoice became financial negligence. A single photo of me holding a glass of wine at a client dinner was labeled possible substance concern. They hadn't been documenting instability. They'd been manufacturing it. Detective Nandan explained the files would need authentication, and the devices would need tracing. She also warned us my father had already called the department, describing the box as a family archive delivered during a misunderstanding and accusing me of overreacting due to long-standing emotional issues. He'd even offered the name of a retired official who could vouch for his character. It was such a familiar move it almost steadied me. He hadn't once asked if I was safe. He'd gone straight to controlling the story. Our attorney, Grace Holloway, reviewed the fake conservatorship petition and caught something the rest of us missed. The psychiatrist's license number belonged to a real doctor, but the name on the letter didn't match the state registry. The notary stamp was genuine, but it had been reported stolen 4 months earlier. Someone had built this file out of borrowed credibility, hoping no one would check closely. Grace drafted a formal cease and desist ordering my parents to stop contacting us, approaching my studio, or using my personal records. Derek wanted to send it immediately. I asked for 10 minutes alone first. I sat with the page and remembered being 22, standing in my parents' kitchen holding an acceptance letter to an art fellowship abroad. My father took it from my hand, folded it twice, and said the family had already invested enough in your detours. Mother cried until I stayed. For 12 years I told myself that had been my choice. I signed the notice. That evening, Detective Nandan called with the first real break. A serial number from the office camera led to a local surveillance supplier. The buyer paid cash, but store footage showed his face clearly. The same man reflected in the fence photo. His name was Dale Corman, a private investigator, whose license had been suspended twice for illegal tracking complaints. Phone records showed repeated contact between Corman and a number registered to my father's logistics company. Nandan told us not to celebrate yet. Contact wasn't proof of conspiracy. Then she added that officers had visited Corman's listed address and found it cleared out overnight. An hour later, my mother left me a voicemail. No mention of police, no mention of the box. She said she'd heard I'd been under stress and offered to help manage the studio until things settled. At the end, her voice dropped. A judge is going to care about stability, Renata. Think very carefully before you make yourself look unstable. I forwarded it to Detective Nandan without replying. For the first time, I didn't hear an all-powerful figure. I heard someone reciting a script. Then Grace called. The petition wasn't a draft anymore. Someone had attempted to file it that morning, before I could even be notified. My parents were requesting emergency conservatorship, claiming Derek and I had gone dark after a domestic crisis, that police involvement proved my instability, and that they were the only ones capable of protecting the business and our finances. They'd turned my 911 call into evidence against me. A hearing was scheduled for the next afternoon. My parents arrived at court, dressed like they were attending a fundraiser. My mother wore soft gray and carried a folder against her chest like armor. My father greeted the courthouse clerk by name. When he saw me, he didn't look afraid. He looked disappointed. The exact expression he wore the one time I brought home a B+. Their attorney called the box a clumsy attempt to share family concerns. He called the hidden cameras a misunderstanding about checking in. He called the stolen notary seal an oversight. Then Grace placed the real, uncropped photographs beside the versions attached to the petition. The one labeled Renata Missing Work, Wandering, showed in the full frame me locking up my own studio at closing time with 2 staff members beside me. The one labeled Concerning Behavior at Family Gathering showed a birthday toast, with 6 other people, holding identical glasses. The judge asked why the images had been altered. My parents' attorney asked for a moment to consult his clients. My father whispered something urgently. My mother stood up anyway. I can explain, she said. The judge told her to sit unless called. She kept talking. She said I'd always been impulsive, that Derek was too passive to manage anything, that someone had to plan for the business before I ran it into the ground the way I ran everything else. Grace asked whether she'd authorized anyone to enter our home. My mother looked directly at me and said, "A mother does what's necessary when her daughter refuses guidance." It wasn't a full confession. It didn't need to be. My father grabbed her arm and told her to stop. The judge noticed. So did the court reporter. Grace played the voicemail. Because my mother had sent it directly to me, there was no consent issue. The judge listened twice, denied the conservatorship petition, barred my parents from contacting me or approaching my studio, and referred the forged documents to the fraud unit. Outside the courtroom, my father lost his composure for the first time in my life. "You have no idea what you've started," he said. "People know us. They know what kind of daughter you are." For most of my life, that sentence would have silenced me. "Then let them see the evidence," I said. Search warrants followed within the week. Investigators recovered stolen invoices, the forged notary seal, surveillance equipment, and a set of binders going back over a decade. Records on Derek's job, my clients, even neighbors who might side with my parents. Dale Corman was found 2 days later at a motel outside the county. Faced with the evidence, he admitted my father had paid him to surveil us, and my mother had provided the schedules used to distract me during the open house. My parents were arrested the following week. My father faced charges including burglary, stalking, conspiracy, and forgery. My mother faced stalking, conspiracy, and attempted fraud on the court. Their attorney called it the criminalization of a private disagreement. That statement didn't survive the news cycle. My father was quietly removed from the community board he'd chaired for years. My mother's social circle thinned out fast, especially after she accidentally sent our extended family a mass message accusing me of fabricating everything with the wrong attachment. A single hidden camera photo of my home office, time-stamped 3 weeks before the box appeared, arrived in every relative's inbox before she could delete it. She had just handed the family the evidence she swore didn't exist. The case took 9 months to resolve. Both eventually accepted plea deals rather than face trial. My father received a multi-year sentence with supervised release. My mother received probation, mandatory treatment, and a long-term protective order. At sentencing, my mother turned to me and asked quietly, "Was it worth destroying everything?" I told her, "I didn't destroy anything." I opened the box. That was the last conversation we ever had. A year later, my studio no longer felt like a place under observation. I changed the smoke detector twice before I stopped glancing at it out of habit. Healing didn't arrive as one dramatic morning. It showed up in small things. Leaving my phone on the counter without checking it, disagreeing with Derek without hearing my father's voice predicting our failure, opening the studio each morning without scanning the street first. Part of our civil settlement required my parents to surrender every photograph, recording, and copied document connected to us. 12 boxes arrived under police supervision. I didn't open most of them. One small envelope was returned separately. My original acceptance letter to that art fellowship, yellowed at the edges, my name still legible. At 35, I applied to a different fellowship in the same field, just for myself, alongside running the studio. When the acceptance came through, I read it out loud to Derek. No one took it out of my hands this time. I framed the warning card from that first box. "Don't make a scene," right beside the acceptance letter on my studio wall. It doesn't read like an order anymore. It reads like the exact moment I stopped following one. If your family has ever mistaken control for love, sit with that difference for a minute. Love doesn't require a hidden camera, a stolen key, or a forged signature to prove itself. Thank you for watching. If this story reached you tonight, subscribe. There are more like it waiting. This story is a work of fiction created for entertainment purposes. All names, characters, and events depicted are entirely fictional. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events, is purely coincidental.